Warriors Home Improvement Show, built by Parr Lumber. When it comes to big or small projects around the home, Tony and Corey have got the know-how and the answers to make your life just a bit easier. Here they are, your Weekend Warriors, Tony and Corey.
Hey, welcome to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show, built by Parr Lumber. I'm Corey Valdez.
And I'm Tony Cookston.
Thanks for tuning in with us today. We've got another great show lined up for you this weekend. Tony and I are going to talk about decks.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to decks because there's so much about them. There's so many things. You may have a deck and you need to repair it, or you may not have a deck and you want one, and you don't know if it's going to be down on the ground or up off the ground. Is it going to require handrail? Is it not? Do you want to do wood or something different? There's so many things to talk about. The hardest thing that this show is going to present you and I, Corey, the hardest thing is trying to segment it in such a way that it comes off,
coherently.
Yeah, like a storyline kind of thing. So that's going to be the challenge. Corey and I have done a lot with decks and decking, building decks, repairing decks, refinishing decks, all of those things. But it all kind of is grouped into our brains. And so pulling it out in segments that make sense is going to be the biggest challenge here today.
Well, pulling anything out of your brain
is a challenge. Already a big challenge. So that's this is the time of year that we're talking about decking, everything decking, because it's absolutely gorgeous outside in the Pacific Northwest. And that's where we want to be, outside. And if you've just got a concrete patio and you're thinking, man, a big old beautiful wood deck would be nice out here, well, this is the show you want to listen to.
Yeah,
because we're going to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna break it down, like you said. We're gonna try and segment this out into if you're repairing, maybe you have a deck and you want to repair it, or you want to just maintain it. We're going to talk a lot about maintenance, but we're also going to talk about building new. And there's so many codes that go along with building new. It'll make your head spin.
And so many decisions that you have to make about how you want it to look and how you want it to work, what you want it to do for you. You know, what do you want to get out of it in the end? So we'll be talking about all that stuff.
Absolutely. So let's get started.
Yeah, let's
say that you already have a deck. I know, Tony, you do.
Yep.
You have a deck on your front porch.
I have sort of a wraparound deck.
Yeah, it's a wraparound big covered porch area.
That's right, yeah.
So let's talk about that. Let's say you have something and you need to maintain it. Let's talk about maintenance right now because, right now, spring.
Yeah, let's talk about what your deck has just gone through over the last 6 months.
Pummeled,
right? It depends on, of course, what the area is like in your region or where you live. Or is your home in a place where you have a lot of tall trees? It's very humid. It doesn't get a lot of sunlight. Maybe, you have got problems with mold or mildew growing on your deck. Maybe when you walk out on your deck in the wintertime,
it's slippery.
It's slimy.
That's
right?
The worst.
That is the worst. And so you now in the spring where the rain has slowed down or stopped and the sun is out, what do you do to revitalize your deck? It's kind of looking dark probably and dirty probably. Maybe it's got some stuff growing on it. What's the first thing we want to do to revitalize our deck that's in the spring?
Well, like you said, it depends on what area you live in. If you're living in an area where it's super hot during the summer, like in Central Oregon or Eastern Washington, your deck's going to look differently than, say, somebody that lives here in the valley, where it just gets pounded with rain and mildew and moss.
Where a river runs through it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing you'd want to do if you have an old mildewy deck is to clean it. You want to get all of that moss and mildew, that green-colored stuff off of there, but you have to be very careful on how you do that.
Yeah, the very first thing somebody wants to do, because it seems like the simplest and easiest and most effective, they want to pull out their pressure washer, fire that baby up, and just start peeling away at the top layer of the deck to get all that yucky stuff off and expose the most beautiful part of it.
Which you can do.
Yeah.
You can do that, but you run a very high risk of ruining that wood that's underneath it.
Yeah.
Especially if you have cedar, if you have a nice cedar deck, it is so soft. And if you get too close with that pressure washer, it'll just turn it super fuzzy. Like Tony's face.
Yes.
Super fuzzy.
Very fuzzy.
And you can't get that to go away unless you sand it.
And it's not a soft fuzzy. it's a hard fuzzy. And you walk on a deck after you have pressure washed it and done it too closely or been too rough with it, and it's poking at the bottom of your feet, and it's unpleasant. It's absolutely terrible. It's like having a something in your hand that's splintery, right? You just don't want to have. You want it to be smooth and pretty, and then you're going to have to go and put a finish on it. And if it's all feathered back because you were rough with the pressure washer, you're going to have a really hard time with that.
Absolutely.
And then you're going to want to sand it. Oh, can you imagine?
No, I have. I've lent my sanding tools to friends before.
In order to sand their
they
deck
have asked
surface?
me, "Hey, would you come over and help me sand my deck?" And I always say, "No." Have fun. But yeah, I've lent my palm sanders. I've lent my belt sander. I even lent my thickness planer out.
Oh man,
and it came back almost ruined.
Oh no!
But you don't want to do it. It's so much work. I even had a buddy of mine who owns a deck or a home with an E-Pay deck on the back, and it southern facing, so it just gets tons and tons and tons
of weather
and sun. And in the summertime, that stuff just starts to buckle up. It wasn't fastened properly. He asked me what he should do to fix the problem, and honestly, the only thing that you can do at that point is add fasteners to it. But that decking is cupped, and it's really difficult to get E-Pay to sit back down.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't look like they properly crowned the deck boards. But anyway, the edges were curling up. So what he did was he rented a floor sander.
Yeah, right.
Like he went there with a floor sander,
2-foot round,
and went through like $300 worth of sandpaper.
Walk behind sander.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And it somewhat worked. It somewhat worked. It looked great. He put a new coat of stain on it, and the next year it's still looking pretty shabby.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said about maintenance.
Yeah. So when you're making the decision about how you're going to clean it, your first course of action should be maybe some sort of a deck detergent. There's a lot of manufacturers of deck detergent out there, like Super Deck makes it.
Deck detergent? You made that word up.
No, it's not. It's not. It's
a deck detergent?
Yeah. That's what I think that's what Super Deck calls their deck detergent. They call it deck detergent. But there's a few manufacturers out there. Penafin makes it. Sunfrog makes it. Super Deck makes it. You can get all those products at Parr Lumber Company.
Yeah, there's wood cleaner, but then there's also wood brightener.
Yeah, there's also wood stripper. And, we should talk about the difference between those things as well.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit today about stains and finishes and how to choose the correct one. And in my opinion, it's penetrating oil all the way. Because if you have a water-based, product that sits on the surface, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, it sits on the surface, and when it dries out or becomes to the end of its life, it starts to peel.
Ugh.
And if you have a product like that starts to peel, you have to strip it.
Yeah,
there's no way around it.
We're actually going to talk about that and so much more when we come back. We've got to take a quick break. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your Weekend Warriors. Don't go away.
Tony and Corey here with the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show, built by Parr Lumber.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, have you seen our new YouTube channel?
Of course I have. Haven't you subscribed to it yet?
Yeah, totally.
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, I don't really know how, so...
Look, it's easy. All you have to do is go to www.homeshow.com and click on the YouTube link. Hit subscribe, and you're good to go.
But my arms are too short.
Oh, come on. It's not that hard.
I think I got bit by a spider.
What? Are you okay?
No, yeah, I'm fine. Hey, does my head look big to you? No? You don't think so? Well, whatever. Tune in this weekend. You'll definitely get a laugh, and you'll likely get some good advice, but only if you listen.
You're listening to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show, built by Parr Lumber. Now, here's Tony and Corey.
Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for staying with us. Today in the show, Tony and I are talking about decks.
All things decks.
All things decks. But I want to take a second If you haven't already, go check out our Facebook and Instagram. We're at WW Home Show. Right now, we're recording this on YouTube. We're broadcasting this on YouTube as a video podcast. So if you want to go check that out, please feel free. Or you can go to our website at www.homeshow.com, and you can listen to our podcasts there. What else, Tony?
Also, if you're familiar with the Parr website, Parr Lumber, Corey and I both work for Parr Lumber, you can go to parr.com, Parr.com, click on the Weekend Warriors link, and it will take you right to our website.
That's right. So, all of our contacts. So if you want to email us, that's on there too.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
we get a lot of questions and comments, so we love it.
Yeah, we do love it. Always good to hear from the listeners and how they feel about what we've said, and love to share more.
We help where we can.
Absolutely. So we're talking about, we were really talking about getting onto your deck after the winter months and what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is clean it. We cautioned a little bit about using a pressure washer. We're not telling you can't use a pressure washer to clean your deck. Absolutely you can. But you need to be conscious or aware of the PSI, was it pounds per square inch of water that your pressure washer is giving you, right? And then you also need to be aware of the distance between the nozzle and the deck surface. And lastly, the type of nozzle that you're using. They make fan nozzles and they make stream nozzles. And if you've got a stream nozzle, you're probably going to cut a hole in your deck, or you're definitely going to damage the surface of your deck. And you just don't want to do that. A nice fan nozzle, 12 or 16 inches away. 12 is probably too close, actually.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the PSI.
Right.
Depends on the pattern of the fan. But yeah, if you get within, I would say if you got within 6 inches, it's probably too close.
Yeah.
It just depends.
I mean, these pressure washers can etch concrete.
Oh, yeah.
If you're pressure washing your driveway, you can actually mar your driveway with a pressure washer. I mean, this water it's a formidable tool. And while it works good, it can easily be misused. And you have to be super
You want to hear a
careful.
really dumb story of
I
something
do.
I did? When I was a teenager, my mom had tasked me with cleaning out the gutters. And I was up on the roof, and I was like, I'm going to use the pressure washer.
Oh.
Which was dumb to start with, right? Because as soon as you put it in there,
already
it just
imagining
splat, it just
Yeah.
blasts out of there, getting everything filthy.
this giant cloud of dirty, torn up leaves.
Just so dumb, right? So I'm up there and I'm like, this is the way to do it. I'm pressure washing it out and it's making this huge mess. Rotten leaves flying everywhere. Anyway, I get the hose kind of pinched a little bit and the pressure washer keeps dying out. Like, and it finally dies out again. And, my mom's down on the ground. I'm like, hey, what's going on with this stupid thing? She's like, I don't know. I'm like, look. And I put my finger over the tip of the pressure washer. And then it fired back up.
Oh, of course it did. Right in that moment.
It cut a hole right in my finger.
In your skin, yeah.
I mean, it hurt so bad, and I could not believe how deep that hole was.
Yeah.
So be very careful.
Yeah, they really do. They do a great job, but you need to use it responsibly. So we're not telling you not to, but we are telling you this. A stiff bristled brush with a long handle, a bucket with warm water and some detergent in there, deck detergent or the like. There's lots of products out there. 30 Seconds is a brand of a product.
30 Seconds Outdoor Cleaner.
Yeah, 30 Seconds Outdoor Cleaner. There's a lot of products out there. You know what? If it's about cleaning your deck, go get one. Try it out. See if you like it. Next time, try something different maybe. But get a cleaner and a stiff bristle brush and brush it and clean it. If afterwards, after you've brushed it and it still didn't come clean and you're dreading the thought of brushing the entire deck again, then maybe get that pressure washer out and give it a shot.
Yeah.
But just
keep
be
in
responsible.
keep in mind, you're not going to get that gray color off. The gray color is, especially if you have a cedar deck, the gray color is the color of the wood, and you're not going to pressure wash that away. If you try to pressure wash that away, that's when you're going to ruin the wood fiber. If it's gray, you want to use a product that we talked about earlier called Wood Brightener.
Mm-hmm.
That'll take that gray silver color away and make it more of a bright, fresh wood color.
Right.
And then you can stain over top of that and it'll look like new again.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's a product made by Sun Frog called Born Again. Same type of product. It's a wood brightener. And so you want to get the deck clean first and remove the debris, the stuff that's on it that isn't supposed to be there. And that will leave some gray behind depending on how old your deck is. But then the brightener will bring that back. You just have to do it in steps. And so being patient and trying all of your things will ultimately result you in what you're looking for.
Yeah. One thing I would say too, that when you're maintaining your deck every spring, before you put your coat of stain down or whatever you're going to do, after you've cleaned it, check all the fasteners. I've been on so many decks where fasteners have broken off. The heads have broken off and there's loose boards, or the gap, is just so large, or a piece of wood, maybe one of the pieces of deck boards has split, and it's just unsafe. You can replace those. That's the great part about cedar.
Yeah.
You could pull it out, put a new one in, and it's going to look slightly different than the old boards that are there. But once you've gotten it down and put a fresh coat on everything of stain, it kind of blends right in.
Yeah, it'll be so much less noticeable.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll be really glad you did it. While you're doing that, there are other things you should check. Depending on whether your deck is down close to the ground or up off of the ground a little bit, you want to check the framing underneath the deck too. Here's a good tip. If you can get to some of the support posts, or even one of the support posts underneath your deck, just take a little hammer and just tap on the side of it. Does it feel really firm and like it's your hammer is bouncing right off of it, like it's really good and strong? That's important. If you tap on it and it feels kind of soft or maybe a little pithy,
or if it's not holding the deck up, it feels just kind of flopping around in there.
Or if the post is not actually sitting on the concrete foundation that's underneath it, these are all signs that something about your deck is off, and you want to do some more investigation. But before you put that coat of stain on it, and your mind says, "Well, it looks like good. Looks like I'm done." Yeah, make sure you check the structural of the deck, because wood decks will not last forever. They simply won't.
Right.
And while nobody wants to shell out a bunch of money to fix it, you also don't want to shell out a bunch of money because it failed and someone got hurt.
Well, one of the biggest, essentially every deck failure, it stems from one thing, right? It's the failure of the wood structure. If the structure of the wood fails, then the whole deck's going to come down. It happens all the time. You see it in the news where you get, a second story deck, with the prom party over there, and you've got 15, 20 kids sitting out on the deck rail getting a really nice picture, and the deck collapses. People get injured or worse. So what Tony's talking about is super important. And I actually have a story about a deck that I worked on that needed severe structural upgrades, which we did. We took care of it and we did it. Mm-hmm. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but you make a really good point, and it's super easy to check that stuff.
Yeah, I can also touch on one of the last decks that I helped to replace, and you would not believe the irresponsibility of the person who built that and left it assumingly safe when it really wasn't. Another thing I want to talk about going forward is the pressure treated framing material that's underneath your deck. A lot of people say, well, it's pressure treated, and pressure treated doesn't rot, so it should be good to go. Well, pressure treated or not, all wood has a lifespan. And in addition to that, you don't know how the people that built it treated it. So we'll cover that right after this break. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your weekend warriors, and we'll be right back. Tony and Corey, your weekend warriors, with a great quick tip for you. Corey and I are here building this mobile collapsible workbench, and we were just cutting 2x4, 1.5 inch thick with his circular saw. Most circular saws come with an adjustable depth cut. And you need to have 1.5 or 2 inches to cut through 2x4, but we're moving now to 3/4 of an inch plywood. And we want to shallow up the depth of that cut so that that blade is not hanging out there when we're cutting something and potentially interacting with something that's underneath the surface that we're working with. It can be dangerous, and this is a safety measure that you should use every opportunity you get. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll catch you next time.
Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for sticking around. Today, Tony and I are talking about decks and deck maintenance right now. First couple segments here, we covered how to clean them and maintain them. And before the break, we were talking about checking the structural integrity of the deck that you have. If you have a second-story deck, it's even more important, than say something on the ground, sitting on sleepers.
Right.
Those little strips of wood, if it's sitting right on the ground, they would call those sleepers. But anything off the ground,
because they're very tired.
Yeah, they're so tired.
They're so tired that they're now sleepers.
They should call them lazies. Just lay there.
Absolutely. I love that. Hey, we actually posed a few possibilities right before we were going to the break, and we should cover those things. We were talking about what I mentioned was pressure-treated lumber. You think about pressure-treated lumber, which is pressure-treated so that it won't rot or decay. That's what pressure-treated lumber is. It's lumber that's been treated so that it won't rot or decay. But pressure-treated lumber has a life as well, and that's if it was properly installed when it was done. If you have a piece of pressure-treated lumber, like a 2x6 joist, for example, and your deck is 11.5 foot deep, and you've got a 12-foot joist, and you cut 6 inches off, that end is susceptible because you've cut off the treated end, and you need to treat the end of that material in order to protect it from rot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people out there, as you and I have both seen, will cut the treated lumber and then not treat the end. And that lumber is susceptible to rot now. If that starts to rot, the structure of your deck starts to rot, then the integrity of your deck is compromised. You need to get it in check. It won't start rotting
immediately.
No.
It'll take some years.
It does take years.
But what'll happen first is it'll get soft.
Right.
And then when it gets soft, the fasteners tend to loosen up.
Right.
And then when they loosen up, the whole deck starts moving. It starts to feel, rickety a little bit. Yeah. When it starts down that path, it gets even worse.
Yeah.
More and more moisture get in, and it accelerates.
And that's not just caused, what you're talking about, that's not just caused by not treating the ends. You can get that sort of wriggly movement in the structure of your deck if it's not tight. Like if you're hanging a joist between two beams, and the distance between the beams is 11'2", and you cut that joist at 11'1", and you split the difference between each end, and you've got a 1/2 inch gap between the joist and the beam at each end.
That's good enough.
Yeah, and you're like, it's in a hanger. It's in a hanger. Well, that's just one little part of a whole deck system, and the whole deck system moves around. And if it's not tight, that will start to move back and forth, and it will sort of get wriggly. And when it gets wriggly, that same thing happens. Connectors start to come loose, and fasteners start to come loose. And the next thing you know, you have a weak spot in your deck, and you don't want that, for sure. That's another one of the things that can happen over the years, and you want to get in there and see that so you can see whether or not it's something that needs to be repaired or replaced.
Right. And that's kind of takes me to my story a little bit. I worked on a deck for my uncle, and they wanted to extend the deck that they had. They had a little 8x8, and they wanted to essentially double it in size. They wanted a 8x16 deck. And I said, well, it's possible. What we have to do is just we'll go in there, we'll cut back the siding, we'll put a piece of ledger on, and just extend this current deck, which was in fairly good shape. We'll just extend it, make it bigger. Well, when we got out there, me and a buddy of mine, we climb under the original deck, and we start working on the siding, cutting it back, installing a piece of flashing, putting the ledger on. Well, what's required of decks is to have that ledger, which sits on the house, to be fastened to the house tightly. and with very strong fasteners.
Just to the subsheeting?
No. And that's when you think about, you have to think about how construction works. You have, the exterior siding, then you have the exterior sheathing, and then you have your wall studs. So depending on where you're fastening that deck, sometimes if you're fastening it like on a second story, there's a floor in between the lower walls and the upper walls. There's that floor diaphragm. And around the perimeter of that floor structure, those joists, there's what's called rim board. And if you have a deck attached to your rim board, it's different. You can just fasten it into that rim board.
Because the rim board is fastened to the structure of the home.
Correct. But if you're fastening it anywhere else, like for instance, this house, the deck was fastened to a pony wall. So the deck, the backyard sloped away, and in the crawl space in the back of the house, there was the foundation down low, and then they built pony wall, is what it's called, on top of that to bring it flush level with the rest of the floor system.
Right.
So this deck ledger was attached to that pony wall. Not only did they not fasten it to the house properly, they just used 16 penny nails, one 16 penny nail on every other stud. There were literally on this 8-foot deck, there were 4 nails holding it up.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, when you walked out on that thing, if you would have had any more than 4 or 5 people out on that thing, it would have collapsed away from the house.
Oh, yeah.
And that is tremendously irresponsible to do that. So what we did was we went inside the house, we searched, we found where the studs were, we located them, and we drew ledger locks made by Fasten Master, these heavy-duty screws. A ledger lock is about, 5/16 in diameter?
Yeah, or maybe 3/8, yeah.
3/8, and it replaces a 1/2-inch lag screw.
Mm-hmm.
It's as strong as a 1/2-inch lag screw. So we dropped 2 of those in on every single stud, 16 inches on center, all the way down that ledger to hold it steadfast to the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so important to do that.
Absolutely.
If you look at modern code, when you're building a deck, a lot of jurisdictions require deck-to-wall fasteners, like Simpson Strong Tie makes a hold down called a DTT2Z.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it fastens to your deck joist that's perpendicular, right, to your ledger. And what you have to do is drill a hole through your ledger, through the rim board or sheathing. You have to tie it in with a ledger or to the joists on the inside of the structure.
Yeah.
With threaded rod.
Yeah.
Or a long bolt.
Right.
And that just creates even more
stability, yeah.
Especially in a zone like we're in with the earthquakes that we get here on the West Coast.
Yeah, that is the epitome of really making a super strong connection to the house. The ledger board is so pivotal. It's so important. It's literally one of the most important things you'll do. I had a similar situation. I was replacing my sister-in-law's deck. It was a elevated deck, but it was only 6 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
But we were able to go underneath the deck, and she actually was originally thinking, it would be great if I could just redeck it, And we walked out of the house through the patio door onto the deck, and it was, if I just moved my hips left to right, that deck shook, right? And I'm like, whoa.
Shimmied.
Yeah, shimmied. Any shimmy at all on a deck that you're standing on is a problem. The tiniest little bit is a problem. That thing should be solid as a rock, right? And so we already recognized there was a problem. We got underneath there, and sure enough, here's the ledger board. Looked normal, flashed, right? Everything looked super, super sweet. 12 penny nails, nailed it to the house and not into the studs. Was not even fastened into the studs. Not only were the nails way too small and too few, but they weren't even in places where they would make the most difference. And so we literally pulled that off with our bare hands. So You wouldn't want that. You got to check that out. We got to talk more about that after this break. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your Weekend Warriors. Don't go away. Parr Lumber is committed to providing the best customer service. We provide personal service. We're problem solvers. We're positive and courteous. We're competent and professional. We are committed to delivering exceptional service every time. We're appreciative and we care. We are Parr Lumber.
Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for staying with us. Today, Tony and I are talking about decks.
Yeah.
And before the break, you were telling a story about your sister-in-law's deck that was barely attached to the wall.
6 feet off the ground.
With 12 penny nails, which is not enough.
Nope.
A. And B, they weren't even fastened into anything solid.
Nope, they weren't
fastened into the wall sheathing.
Yep, it's absolutely
That's
the truth.
insanity.
Yeah, it was crazy.
You have to think about your ledger as the backbone of your deck.
Absolutely. It seems feasible that the posts and the concrete footings would be the backbone. But the thing is, if it's not attached to the house, then it can fall over. And it doesn't matter how many concrete footings you've got sitting underneath it. If it's not attached to the house, but it was intended to be attached to the house, then it can fall over. You can build a deck that's not attached to your house.
Freestanding. Yeah, you
freestanding.
can.
And it can be strong. And it doesn't need that ledger. But you have to build it in that way with that in mind. This one was built to be attached to the house and simply was not properly attached to the house. It was, danger. Super, super dangerous. So we said all that to say this. If you're about to refinish your deck to make it through another summer, don't just throw stain on it and call it good.
So, yeah.
Get in there, research it, check it out, check the wood, see if it's strong, check the fasteners, make sure they're not coming out. Here's another thing.
If the deck has a shimmy.
Big
problem.
It's probably time to replace it.
There's a few other things, and you're probably going to mention one right now, but there's a few other things that you need to look for when you're under there looking at that deck framing.
Yeah, well, corrosion is one.
Yes.
Decks are put together with a lot of metal nails,
Or should be.
should be. Metal connectors or even metal screws. Screws are great. Nothing wrong with screws. But if the screw doesn't have a coating on it that protects it from corrosion when it's used with pressure-treated lumber, then it's not going to last. Pressure-treated lumber is treated with copper azoles. And those copper azoles, they don't like some nail finishes, right?
Yeah, they create dissimilar metals. If you're into chemistry, which I'm not, but from what I know, dissimilar metals create a catalyst, and they will corrode much faster because you have zinc in nails and copper in the wood, that when those come together, it just creates corrosion.
Right.
And if you use, like, say, an interior grade screw or an interior grade nail that doesn't have that proper coating, like hot dipped galvanizing or, epoxy coating, sometimes they have different ceramic coatings that work really well. And you can see those on the box when you buy them. It'll say, ACQ compatible sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, you make a great point. If you don't use those right nails, you're going to have a big problem.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for metal connectors. Simpson Strong Tie, for instance, probably one of the most popular metal connector on the market. They make specific hangers for pressure-treated material. So if you're going into the store and you're buying your deck materials and you say, well, I'll get this hanger right here because it's $1.50, or that one, it looks the same, but it's
$3.25.
Yeah, it's $3.25. I'll save myself $50 by buying these cheaper hangers. That is huge problem.
Yeah.
Huge problem because of the same reason. Those special hangers have a special coating on them that resists the corrosion from the copper in the pressure-treated lumber. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is, again, if you're having maintenance, a maintenance schedule on your deck this year and you're working on it, there was a period of time where pressure-treated lumber was treated with what's the word?
It was CCA was the code. What was it called? I don't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, it was an old. It used arsenic.
Yeah,
that's what it was. And then during what was it? Bill Clinton. They passed this law that said, no more arsenic in pressure treated lumber. I remember this because kids were eating, the wood at the playgrounds, and they were getting whatever.
Right,
they were afraid of people getting sick with the arsenic. So they banned it. All arsenic in residential use, no longer. So they had to find another treatment that was good enough, right? Because people had this expectation because putting arsenic into the wood worked really great, So they came up with this copper azole. It's all natural. It's not going to kill you.
Right.
And during that period of time, people didn't know. They didn't understand that copper and zinc would create this problem.
Right.
So
there was a long overlap period there where it was a learning curve where people were understanding, hey, I built this deck 2 years ago and this metal hanger has already corroded away and it's gone. What in the world has happened?
Yeah.
I was using electro-galvanized nails in this deck that I built at the beach, and those nails have disintegrated. They're gone. Disappeared completely. So what's happening?
If you have a deck on your home that is more than 10 years old, maybe 10 to 12 years old or older, pay special attention. Go under that thing. Look at the hangers. Look at the post caps. Look at the post bases. All of the hardware on that deck. The nails. If you see rust, that is a surefire sign that they are probably not the proper nails or hangers that should have been used in that application.
Right.
If you're at the beach, I was at my uncle's house at the beach. He owns a house out there, and it's, 100 yards from the ocean.
Yeah.
And he's like, what do I need? What do I do here? All of these hangers are in bad shape. And I go out there, sure enough, hundreds. This deck is gigantic. I mean, it's probably 20 by 80, wraps around the whole back of the house. It's this gigantic deck, and there's probably 200 hangers under there.
Wow.
All of them were just regular old hangers at the beach.
Yeah.
That were just corroded. So, I told him, I'm like, I wouldn't even walk out on this deck until you get this fixed. So they had to get special custom-made stainless steel hangers that were wide enough that could go over the old hangers so they didn't have to destroy the whole thing and rebuild it.
Yeah, so Simpson has started to make stainless steel hangers in very common sizes. They're expensive. But if you're doing something at the beach, it's really the only way. They haven't got a full line of stainless steel products to replace all the products that they have in Zinc-Alume or in Z-coated, or even in the regular uncoated hangers. But there are some, and you can have them made if you need to for your application.
Yep.
But at the very least, make sure that you have a Z-Max. If it's a Simpson hanger, make sure you have a Z-Max hanger that is coated for use with treated material. Make sure you're using screws that are coated for use with pressure treated material. And if all else fails, a stainless steel fastener is definitely the way to go. It's definitely an option.
Yeah, that is the gold standard.
Yeah, it's the gold standard. You'll spend a little bit more money, but you'll definitely be happy with it, and you won't have to replace it.
I do want to say something real quick about screws in general. When you're shopping for screws, you have to be careful about the screws that you're buying. You have to make sure that they're structural. Not all screws are intended to be structural. A nail, for instance, like if you have a 16 penny nail versus a 3.5 inch just standard screw, that screw might not necessarily be structural, because the thing about nails is they have a really high shear.
Right.
So if you nail it into your whatever hanger, that where you get the strength is, it won't shear off.
Right.
Where a lot of
screws are
non-structural screws that are not rated for that, they will just shear right off.
Yeah, the diameter of a lot of screws out there is smaller because there's a lot of use for screws that aren't in that structural application.
Sure.
So you just need to know what you're buying, and if you have a question about it, ask your local Parr lumber employee, one of your front counter sales guys, and they can certainly help you determine which screws would be the best for your application.
Yeah. I used to see it all the time. People would frame things with sheetrock screws.
Oh yeah, all the
you know,
time.
And they're just not structural. You give it a good whack with a hammer, snap all of them in half.
Yeah. It's
So-
absolutely. I mean, they make them as small as a 6, a number 6 or a number 7. Those are very, very small diameter screws, and they will shear. The head will just come right off.
Yep.
Yeah. So So that's really what we're talking about. And then once you've done that and you feel really confident about your deck, the posts and the supports, the fasteners and the brackets and all of the things that it's put together with, that's the time really that you go ahead and put that final coat of stain on it, and then you know it's good to go for another year. We should talk a little bit. We should talk a little bit more probably about the stain you're choosing. You did say it needs to be a penetrating oil stain and not something other than that.
Well, that's my opinion.
Well, we should talk a little bit more about that when we come back from the break. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your weekend warriors. Don't go away, because we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show, built by Parr Lumber. When it comes to big or small projects around the home, Tony and Corey have got the know-how and the answers to make your life just a bit easier. Now, here's Tony and Corey.
Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. I'm Corey Valdez.
I am still Tony Cookston.
Thanks for sticking around with us.
Yeah.
Today, Tony and I are talking about decks.
Yes.
And we spent the whole first half of the show talking about deck maintenance.
Yeah.
Making sure that the structure is strong and stable and that you have the correct fasteners, the correct hangers. One other thing before we get into the actual staining process is we've talked before about switching from like a wood or a cedar to a composite. And one of the things to keep in mind, and I've heard this question all the time, people are tired, they don't want to put down stain anymore, and they just want to put down composite. Well, you have to be cautious. You have to think about the on-center spacing of your deck framing. Your deck has joists, and those joists are put together typically 24 inches on center for a wood deck like cedar.
For a 2x.
Yeah.
For a 2x wood deck.
Right.
Yeah.
So other decking materials like 5/4 cedar, you have to have 16 on center.
Right.
Epay, 1x Epay, like 1x6, that will span 24 on center. So it's just depending on what you have. But if you're coming into Parr Lumber to buy composite decking, you say, I'm just tearing off the old cedar. I want to put composite decking down on top of it. Here's my lengths. Be cautious because you have to realize that composite decking requires 16 inches on center. And
in the field.
And 12
inches on center at the stairs.
Right. 12 inches on center. And some of them even recommend 8 inches on center. So you just have to think about that. And it's not the end of the world. If you look under your deck framing and it's 24 inches on center, you can come in and add joists. Add a joist between every one, essentially having 12 inches on center. That's not going to kill the budget.
Right.
It's probably going to add $100, but you'd be way better off.
Yeah, absolutely. The actual framing portion of the deck, the framing timbers, whether it's 2x6 or 2x8 or whatever it is, that's actually the least expensive part of the deck, the understructure. The more expensive, of course, is the decking surface, and then the subsequent handrail if it's required.
Yeah.
That's where all the money is. So beefing your deck up, making it stronger by adding joist that's not the budget killer. Yeah. So it's important to give that good consideration. So we've decided that that the deck is feeling good, right? It's good and strong, no shimmy, right? That's important. And we're going to go ahead and put a coat of stain, right? You were talking earlier in the show about not using something that left a solid surface on the deck, right?
Yeah, that's my opinion. And the reason I say that is because I've seen lots of decks and I've used lots of deck products that sit on the surface. They're like an acrylic base that you paint them on like a semi-transparent stain. A lot of manufacturers make them, and they claim, oh, they're the best things in Swiss cheese. But in my opinion, I've seen them,
there's
peel.
a lot of
They peel up.
That's just one major issue. There's more to be said about that too. And of course, Corey and I don't manufacture deck finishes, and we're not contractors necessarily. But
and I don't even have a deck.
But there's conversation about not allowing the deck to breathe through the top of the deck board because it's got a solid surface now on the top, and so any moisture that's leaving the deck has to go out through the bottom, and that can be, the way I understand it, that can be problematic, causing the board to swell at the bottom where the moisture is going out and not at the top, which causes checking and splitting. So there's more, and like I said, we don't manufacture the stuff, right? But we are firm believers in a penetrating oil stain, which soaks into the wood and protects it from the inside out. And it doesn't require a stripper to take it off when you're ready to put a second coat on. You can put right over the top. Just like if you were staining, putting an oil finish on a piece of furniture.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of that.
Yeah. You just add coats.
Yeah, you just add coats.
Like Tony said, there's Penafin, for instance. Super Deck makes one. Penafin makes one.
Sunfrog.
There's a lot of penetrating oils out there. I sell a ton of Penafin, and the reason is exactly that. You put it down, the next year, you put another coat. A couple more years go by, you want to put another coat in, you put another coat down. You don't have to do that scraping and pressure washing and stripping the old product off.
Yeah, that's it's so much nicer. When you're putting down Penafin, for example, or Super Deck, these products generally require that you put down 2 coats. You would put the decking on the board, ideally with a brush or a roller, because as you're brushing or rolling it on, it's working that into the wood, which is what you want to do. But you want to put it on liberally, not so much that you end up with a puddle. You don't want to have
you
puddles.
don't want puddling because it'll gel and kind of get sticky.
Oh yeah, it's not a good situation. You don't want that. So you want to avoid that. And the way you do that after you've covered the entire deck, or if you're doing it in sections after you've covered your section, then you want to go back and wipe it back. So apply it liberally and then wipe it back with like an old t-shirt, some t-shirt type material, something that doesn't leave pills behind. Definitely not anything made out of paper that can come apart. That'll just drive you crazy.
No Charmin.
Right, no. And so you put that on liberally and you wipe it back and then let that sit. And then after you've let it sit for a while, then you put another coat on, wipe it back, and then you've got something accomplished. It can be a challenge, getting from point A to point Z on your deck and getting the whole thing done. What are your thoughts, Corey, on spraying deck oil on a deck with like a
pump sprayer?
Yeah, like a pump sprayer.
I don't know. I don't have thoughts on that. I've never tried it. I don't really know anybody that has done it. I mean, if you look at the manufacturer's installation instructions recommended on how you apply that product, I don't think there is any for spraying. So I would say no, but I'm not positive.
I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
People ask me that a lot, and I tell them that same thing. I say, well, they recommend that you use a brush or a roller.
Well, even if you sprayed it on, you'd still have to back brush it, and you'd probably still have to back wipe.
You'd have to still have to wipe it back. Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, I don't know. I don't see a clear benefit in spraying it on other than easier application. Maybe if you have a handrail, it would be easier to spray.
I'll tell you where a really great place is to use that pump sprayer and that stain is on your fence. Fences are good for pump spraying stain. I've pump sprayed several fences in my time and seems to get right in those areas and get it all done. Of course, you don't have to wipe that back. Just let it drip right off, right? And so that's a good application for that. If you're just dying to use your pump sprayer with your stain, put a fresh coat on your fence. That'll make you happy. So that's pretty much it for staining. We got a lot more stuff to cover. You won't want to miss it. Don't go away. You're listening to Tony Corey, Your Weekend Warriors. We'll be right back.
Hey, here's a quick tip for you when you're working with cedar. I'm installing these fence boards on this gate butted tight together because they're green. They can come in either green or dry. If they were dry, I would gap them slightly because cedar and any sort of wood will expand and contract with moisture. So if I installed these tight and they were dried, when they absorbed a little bit of moisture, they could potentially buckle. So be aware of what you're buying and space them accordingly. Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for staying with us. If you haven't already, go check us out on our Facebook and Instagram. We're at WW Home Show. We're also recording this show right now on video podcast that'll air on YouTube. So go subscribe to that and watch those, like those, leave your comments there. If you'd like to send us an email, you can go to parr.com. That's PARR.com. Click on the Weekend Warriors link, and both Tony and I's information is there. You can send us questions or comments. We'd be happy to help.
Absolutely.
So, so we've been talking about decks today, and we kind of covered the whole first half. We covered if you have a deck, maintaining it, proper maintenance, making sure that it's still structurally strong. But let's shift gears, Tony. Let's say we want to build a deck.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Well, I mean, the first thing you want to do is decide how big it's going to be, where it's going to go, how it's going to look. I mean, draw a picture. I think the first thing you do is draw a picture. I love to draw pictures of projects. It's like my favorite thing to do.
Me too.
So it's where I start always. And then I draw it like 42 times. And then I send it to Corey. He picks it apart and then I draw it again. And then eventually he says, hey, that was a pretty good drawing. I'm like, all right, I'm on it. So anyways, it's always fun because it's easier when you go to get material quotes, right? It's easier if you can convey your mental picture of what you want. And the easiest way to do that is to draw a picture of it. Now, let's take that one step further, right? Maybe instead of drawing a picture, you already know what size you want it to be. You can go to Parr Lumber Company, for example, and you can say, this is the size of the deck that I want. Can you show me what it's going to look like when it's done? Parr Lumber Company and building material suppliers all over have some sort of
software,
of software that they can put in a deck size and it'll print out a little picture. You can even sometimes go onto the internet and find a small tool and a simple tool where you can, draw your deck on there and get an idea what it's going to look like. Yeah. But really, the vision is the first thing.
Yeah, I tend to think, depending on your situation, right? If you have just a ton of money and you don't care what a deck costs, you just say, this is what I want and this is what I'm getting. But I think for the average person, they should find out what the thing costs before they start, putting the sky's the limit.
Sure.
I worked at the front counter at Parr Lumber Company for many years, and probably the number one thing that people would do, they would come in with this drawing
on a napkin.
Say, yeah, and I want this as the deck. I want it, 30 feet by 100 feet by, 4 stories with a hot tub and all of these things on it. And then when they realized that that was going to cost them $100,000, they would go, oh my goodness. Oh, I was thinking it would be like 5,000.
Yeah.
So you find out real quick what their budget is.
Yeah.
And unless you're knowing what you're going to go in and ask for, it's really difficult to say, well, yeah, I want this. I mean, if you're building a deck out of necessity and it's going to have to be, 8 foot by 4 foot because it has to go here and that's where the entrance of your house is and you can't even get in your house without a deck, that's different.
Yep.
But I always recommend going in and looking at your different options and saying, okay, this decking is going to be about this price per square foot. The framing is going to cost you about this price per square foot. And if it's more than 30 inches off the ground, you have to have a railing. So now it's going to cost you about this price per linear foot of railing. It's going to cost stairs. And if it's this far off the ground, now all of a sudden you have to have drawings drawn by an architect and you have to have engineering. It gets pretty spendy pretty quick, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I say find out just a few simple questions, how much things are going to cost you. That way you can go back and go, oh, well, I can afford maybe this size deck, or if I go out this way, I can maybe make it a little bit bigger for this amount of money.
Yeah, I think that when you're trying to decide some of the things, some of them are going to be decided by necessity. Like, for example,
Oh, sure.
you might be saying, well, I don't know if I want my deck to be more than 30 inches off the ground and require a handrail. Well, you might not have a choice, because if you're going to be walking onto your deck from your back door or your side door or front door, do you want to be stepping down to your deck? Or you certainly don't want to be probably stepping up to your deck. And so the deck surface, the height of the deck off of the ground, is going to be predicated on your need. What is the need? What's the distance from the floor to the bottom of your door? That's the amount of room that you have to work with. And most of the time, that's not very high. As a matter of fact, most of the time, you're kind of crammed for space right there.
Probably, it depends. Depends on the geography of where you live.
If you're building a deck on the back of the house, underneath your patio door, which has been stepping out onto a concrete patio, I can tell you already, you got a tight little spot there. And the distance between the top of the concrete and the bottom of the patio door is just barely enough probably to put some sleepers down and make sure that you run them out level and then put a deck on top of that. But all of those decisions oftentimes are based on necessity. So knowing that, all of those things, the things that you're tied to, the height or the width or the length of your deck, knowing that before you go in to get a price on it will make the process so much easier.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about things that could potentially cost you more money just in design. For instance, I have seen deck plans by people that have gone to an architect or whatever and have had plans drawn up, and they bring these plans to us and they say, I want to build this deck. And you look at that thing and it's got pressure treated glue lambs on a deck that are 3 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
If you know anything,
over-engineered?
if you think about anything or know anything about construction, you'll know that is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. If you have a pressure treated glue lamb, for instance, it's going to cost you $1,000 for that beam. Easily. And if it's only 2 feet off the ground or 3 feet off the ground, there is no need for it at all. Because what you can simply do is put another pier pad in and shrink the size of that beam. So what I always say is to value design any structure like that. If you're building a deck, if it's 10 feet off the ground and you have a patio underneath it, you don't want piers and pads every 4 feet. That's a different situation. That is where a beam like that would be required, where you would want to clear span something to have an opening down below the deck versus 2-3 feet off the ground. You're just putting it in there to waste somebody's money.
Yeah.
So definitely talk to the professionals at Parr Lumber Company. They are there to help. I know I can help with, span tables and, simple things like that. We have a person on staff that can help you with beam calculations. You say, I have a deck this size. I need a deck beam to span, every 4 feet. I mean, honestly, it's probably going to be like a 4x6.
Mm-hmm.
You want to put the smallest amount you can in there and be structurally strong. That's what's going to save you the most amount of money.
Yeah. Speaking of value engineering, if you're designing your deck and you have a lot of space to work with, and you get to choose, where it's going to land or how tall it's going to be or whatever. There's less expensive ways to do it. For example, if you post up to a beam and you set your joist on top of the beam,
right,
and you put your decking on top of the joist, and you have all this height where you can have framing in there, that's the least expensive way to go. When you find yourself crammed into a tight little space where you don't have all that, and you have to hang your joist from your beam, and you have to set your beam on the concrete, and you have to pier block the entire length of the beam because you're there, and you have to dig holes to get you're now spending more money, but it's because of necessity.
Yeah, you're increasing costs, but not necessarily. I've seen situations where, again, a deck is 4 feet off the ground. And the architect has specified hanging a beam, a flush beam in there. So then you're adding all of that expensive hangers. It just makes no sense sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Again, a lot of that stuff will be predicated on necessity, but you just won't know until you start to build the vision in your mind, draw a little picture, get to the lumberyard, and get it quoted. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your Weekend Warriors. Don't go away.
We're ready to put this on the wall, but we have to make sure we put it in the right way. The insulation is made up with the fiberglass, and then this is called the vapor barrier, otherwise known as craft paper or craft face. Craft face insulation, the insulation fiberglass portion goes towards the wall, and then you should see the paper face when you're done.
There's a couple ways to attach this to the studs. You can pull this ear over and fasten it right onto the stud just like this. Or you can put this ear on the inside and fasten it to the inside of the stud. Both are acceptable. The sheetrocker would rather you have it on the inside than the outside in case the staples don't go all the way in.
Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for staying with us. Today, Tony and I are talking about decks, deck framing, deck maintenance. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about saving some money when designing a deck. And some of those situations where it necessarily isn't required to spend extra money on larger beams when you can add a post and a pier pad.
Okay, how about this? Is a permit required when building a deck?
Sometimes.
Okay, so the very first thing you got to do is find out whether or not there's a permit required.
Oh, yeah.
And then you got to find out what that costs and add that to your budget. That's important. You don't want to get caught building a structure that requires a permit and you don't have a permit. We talk about this all the time. This is another one of those things where a lot of times, I would venture to say most times, if you're building a deck on your property and attaching it to your house or not, a permit is probably required. It depends on your jurisdiction. It probably depends on the size. It depends on a lot of things. But don't go into it blind and assume it's not necessary and then find out you have to destruct it or you have to pay an exorbitant amount of money in order to get it done. I don't even know, but I don't want to know either. So check that out.
Yeah. Call the jurisdiction and ask.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm building this blank 10 by 10 deck. It's 4 feet off the ground. Do I need a permit?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's important. Corey, if a permit is required, then does that mean that certain hangers and the way that the deck is built is also required?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, if you're pulling a permit, I imagine they would want a predetermined drawing of that deck. In some jurisdictions, you may be okay drawing that yourself and specifying what they call prescriptive path on if there's engineering required. A lot of times the jurisdictions will send you a sample drawing or they'll have like some sort of packet of information. They say, you have to incorporate all of this into that deck. Mm-hmm. I've seen that before. So it is possible. But I'm not a contractor.
Right.
So I don't deal with these things every day.
There are guys out there that will say to you, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to have a ledger board and I'm going to have a footer board and I'm going to fasten right through the ends of those, right into the end of all of my joists. And I'm going to frame up a box. I'm going to set that box right on pier blocks at the front, post up in the back just to make it almost level, not completely level because there needs to be a drop. And then I'm going to deck it. I'm going to call it good. There's no hangers on it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's guys out there that will say that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fine if there's not a permit that requires you to do it in a different way. That's fine if it's not off the ground. It doesn't require a handrail. That's fine for a lot of applications. But you need to know. You have to check it out. You got to ask the question. Call the local jurisdiction and find out. But there are certainly ways to value engineer a deck, right? But it all depends on the scope of the project. If your deck is up off the ground, you're not going to want to be cutting corners. You're not going to want to be building a deck that doesn't have connectors that hold it together and make it strong. You don't want to do that. You don't want to build a deck that's not, going to be as strong as it should be. I mean, that's especially if you're going to have people walking on it, right?
Well, and here's another thing that people run into all the time when they come in and they start pricing out their deck. There's something that's 6-7 feet off the ground, and they're like, oh yeah, this deck's going to cost me X amount of dollars per square foot. The decking is this. I've made my decision. I'm going to build this deck. And then they have to get to the railing. And they forget that railing can range anywhere from
$50 to $80 to $100
as cheap
a foot.
as, if you build it out of wood, you could build it for $20 a linear foot.
25
to $100 a linear foot.
Yeah.
It's really expensive. So if you have a large deck like that, railing could add 10 grand.
I'm building my deck quite a ways off the ground. It's not really a second story deck, but it's up off the ground quite a bit. There's a lot of airflow underneath there. I'm not going to use pressure treated lumber. Just going to use regular lumber because it's not making ground contact, so it doesn't need to be treated, right?
No, yeah, that's ridiculous.
That is,
actually, it's not ridiculous if you live in Central Oregon.
right.
They don't use pressure treated lumber in Central Oregon because it is so dry that it doesn't rot. They don't have pressure treated lumber over there typically. It's weird.
What happens to lumber that's not treated, that's plenty far off the ground and is not making contact with the ground? I mean, how does moisture get trapped there? How could it possibly rot? You've got decking fastened tightly to the tops of those joists all the way across. And guess what? It doesn't get sunlight right there. I mean, that board is going to trap moisture there, and that will cause it to rot. It's guaranteed. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So even though you think, but it's not touching the ground, it doesn't need to be treated, it's not a risk I'm willing to take. It's not a risk you're willing to take.
No.
If your 4x4s are not sitting right on the concrete, but instead you've put roofing in between, like composition roofing, so that the block doesn't transfer moisture from the block to the wood. So it's okay then to not use pressure treated on your post. I'm saying, Corey, these are the things we hear on a daily basis.
You're right.
Customers come to the counter and they say, look, this makes sense to me. If it's not transferring moisture from the concrete to the wood because I've put this barrier in there, then why do I need pressure treated material? The fact is, these are areas underneath the deck that doesn't get proper sunlight. These are areas that trap heat in the summer. Trapped heat and no sunlight and a wet climate results in moisture, and that moisture will rot your wood. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's making contact with the ground or making contact with the concrete. It's a good idea to separate your 4x4 from your concrete, even if it is pressure treated. And if you cut that post and put it on that concrete, you make sure you end treat that 4x4 because it's
end cut solution
susceptible to rot, even if it's treated, if you don't put end cut solution on all your cuts.
I'll give you a tip. They make end cut solution in spray can form.
Oh yeah,
and it's
nice.
Amazing. Every time you
Absolutely.
spray cut, you just hit it with the spray can and you're done.
Yep, that's all you got to do. Warranty intact, everybody's happy, and you don't have to worry about that thing rotting. That's good.
So earlier in the show, we talked about fasteners. And again, let's cover this again because when you're building a new deck, this is just as important. You should always use the proper metal connectors that are compatible with pressure-treated lumber that is made with copper azoles or ACQ. You'll see hangers, you'll see fasteners, you'll see these things that'll say ACQ compatible. That means they've added some sort of coating to that, whether it be epoxy or some sort of, process that electroplates something to it. Simpson Strong-Tie makes what they call Z-Max. Z-Max is acceptable to use with pressure-treated lumber. And the reason for that is because those copper in the wood and the zinc in the hanger creates together, it's dissimilar metals. It creates electrolysis, creates corrosion, and it will corrode that stuff immediately. I mean, within days. I've seen regular hangers touched against copper PT and it's corroding immediately. Mm-hmm. So something to keep in mind. If you're building a deck at the coast, I highly, highly, highly recommend using stainless steel. If you're within, a mile of the coast, you absolutely should be using stainless steel.
If you want it to last and be safe, for years and years going forward, it's the best bet.
Yep.
Corey, so I want to attach my ledger to the house, and I'm going to use some really strong fasteners to make sure it's really good. Do I really need to cut the siding off before I put the ledger on, or can I just put the ledger right on top of the siding, even if I use a piece of flashing?
I've seen deck builders. There's a product out there called deck to wall spacers, D2Ws. And what those do is it looks like a hockey puck with a hole in the middle.
Yeah.
And they're super heavy duty plastic. And what you do is you put them between the house and the ledger, and you put your lag screw or timber lock through that into your wood framing, and it holds it off the surface so moisture cannot get trapped there.
That seems like the easiest way to go, and you don't have to flash it if you're going to use the deck to wall spacers.
Correct.
That's super smart. We got to take another quick break, and then we're going to wrap this show up. You're listening to Tony and Corey, your Weekend Warriors. We'll be right back.
Hey, here's a quick tip for you when you're working with cedar. I'm installing these fence boards on this gate butted tight together because they're green. They can come in either green or dry. If they were dry, I would gap them slightly because cedar and any sort of wood will expand and contract with moisture. So if I installed these tight and they were dried, when they absorbed a little bit of moisture, they could potentially buckle. So be aware of what you're buying and space them accordingly. Hey, welcome back to the Weekend Warriors Home Improvement Show. Thanks for staying with us. Today in the show, we're talking about decks and deck framing. We've been kind of sticking on deck framing here for a couple segments. You know, Tony, you were bringing up a lot of random questions that we get, at Parr Lumber. People walk in the door and they ask these questions like, what if I do this?
Yeah.
And you had a funny one during the break we were just kind of talking about.
I feel like these shortcuts, people are always looking for an opportunity to shortcut something, right? And I understand. You were talking about value engineering, right? I understand saving money where you can. But when you're talking about safety, right? These decks that you're building, you're not the only one on them. Other people are on them. And even though you might not walk close to the edge because it's 29 3/4 inches off of the ground and you don't have a handrail because you just skirted by, that doesn't mean somebody's not going to fall off. And when they do, you're going to think, man, I wish I would have had a handrail. These rules are in place for a reason. And we're just telling you, shortcuts rarely pay off. I had a guy come in and said this exact thing. How high can the deck be off the ground before I have to have a handrail? And I said, it's 30 inches. And he says, well, I'm a little more than that. I'm about 32 inches off the ground, but I don't want to have to spring for a handrail. What if I pile up dirt around the outside of my deck so that from the top of the berm to the surface of the deck, it's less than 30 inches? Well, in your view, that might be okay. But do you think that an inspector can't see through that? Inspector's going to run a tape down between two deck boards down to the concrete footing, and he's going to measure up from the bottom of the concrete footing to the surface of the deck, and he's going to say, hey, this is 33 inches. You don't have a handrail, and now you're in trouble. And so now you don't pass your inspection, and I don't even know, shortcuts, right? I mean,
there's a lot of other ways you can save money on if you are just trying to build a deck that is as least cost, or as most cost effective as possible. So you say you're building it out of necessity, or you have to put a deck in that position or that placement. There's a lot of ways. Again, talk to somebody at Parr Lumber Company, talk to a professional, and figure out the best framing. The least expensive framing that still meets the proper code. If you have a deck situation like that. Nobody says you have to have the deck flush with the bottom of the door. I've seen decks where you can drop it down a whole foot or 7 inches and
step down,
have one step down onto the deck. That's perfectly okay. It's not ideal. People don't like stepping down onto a deck, but it can be done. And you save a lot of money that way if you just get under that, and have it, totally on the up and up.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. 2x6 cedar pro deck, for example, or 2x6 cedar decking. It's running about $2.10 a foot right now.
It's up to like $2.20 now.
Depending on what length you're buying. 8s, 10s, 12s, 14s are a little less.
Yeah.
16s, 18s, 20s, a little more. Okay. But pressure treated, like elite decking from exterior wood, kind of like outdoor wood. It looks like outdoor wood. That's about $1.45 or maybe $1.50 per foot for that product. But I really want to save some money. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to deck the top of my deck with just Standard and Better fir. So, I mean, what's the problem with that, right? I mean, it's just something that you're walking on. Why would I not want to use 2x6 green Doug fir for my deck?
Well, you certainly could. You know, nobody's stopping you. But again, it's like anything. You're spending money now that you're going to be re-spending in a very short period of time versus using a proper product, right? So I'm going to put that down there. It's going to cost me, let's say, $500. Well, for $700, you could have put the proper product down. You know, that's what's really crazy. I mean, if you think about per square foot and how much lumber is versus doing it right, you know, you're really just not saving that much money, and you're cutting the lifespan of that product tremendously.
And that's a really common one. I just want to put Standard and Better down. Let me tell you something.
That is common. I get that question all the time. Oh, I just needed something temporary. It's a rental. I'm trying to sell it.
Well, here's
look, you're doing somebody else a disservice.
Here's problem numero uno, and I'm going to honestly drop the mic with this one. This is it. 2x6 green Doug fir, super inexpensive. Let's say 50 cents a foot, maybe, right? A third the price of what you would pay otherwise. But you know what? It's green. And as the sun shines on it, it's going to start to dry. And when it starts to dry, the pitch from inside of that comes right up onto the surface. And then you walk on it. It gets on your shoes, and then you walk in the house and you track it into your carpet and all through your house, and it gets on your furniture. And now guess what? You're replacing the carpet in your house and the decking on your deck outside. You don't want to have that product or anything like that product on your deck. A finished deck surface is specifically that, a finished deck surface. And the last thing you want is hot pitch on the top of your deck attaching to the bottom of your shoes or to your baby's feet or to your dog's mouth or whatever. You just don't want it. That seems like a feasible shortcut, but trust me when I tell you, it is not.
No, you make a good point there. Actually have a couple more things, money saving, things when you're designing a deck.
Yeah.
You'll agree with this one. For instance, lumber comes in 2-foot molds.
Right.
So you have 8-foot, 10-foot, 12-foot, 14, 16, 18, 20.
Right.
So when you're going out to build a deck, don't design it at 7 feet.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're burning a foot for every board.
You're throwing away a foot on every single board. So design it at 8 feet, design it at 10 feet, create these scenarios where you're using the most material for what you're buying.
Here's something else.
I see that all the time.
Here's another one.
This deck right here, it's 5 foot 4 inches by, 13 feet. Well, you're throwing away a ton of material.
I'm building a 20-foot deck, and I'm just going to get straight 20s. That's what I want. Is that value engineered?
Oh, no.
Here's the thing, folks. You think that you want to put down all 20s so that you have no seams anywhere, and it's going to be so amazing. 20s are a lot more expensive than 8s and 10s. In cedar, for example, right? And then ultimately in the end, you don't notice those seams. If it's put down properly, like if it's not put down right and the fasteners are sticking up or you don't hit a joist or, it splits, you put those screws too close to the end and it causes a problem, well, that's one thing. But if it's installed properly, those seams disappear the second time you walk on the deck. I mean, it's part of the way it's done on a regular basis, and seams are not a deal breaker.
Well, it's like you walk into any home and you have a, solid wood, oak, hardwood floor, do you expect 20-foot pieces to span your entire room? I don't want any seams in my hardwood floor.
No.
They're going to laugh at you.
Yeah.
I mean, those pieces come out anywhere between 6 inches and, 8 feet.
Very common to have butt joints on your deck all over the place, and nobody is going to tell you, I can't believe you have so many butt joints on your deck.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, that money in your pocket that you saved by buying shorter lengths and joining them is definitely going to be something that you can appreciate.
Yeah, currently 2x6 decking, cedar decking, 8s, 10s, and 12 footers are a bit cheaper than 14s, 16s, 18s, and 20s because of, the cedar pricing is just going up and they're hard to come by. So it's just the way it is.
Yeah, it is the way it is. So anyway, these were good things. Here's something else, the least expensive lumber. I want to use the least expensive lumber to build my handrail. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, right? But the same thing goes for your handrail. I've seen handrail made out of SPF, spruce pine fir. It's intended to be used as trim on the outside of your home, and it's not intended to be used for handrail, but they do it because it's inexpensive.
And they paint it.
And then they paint it. There's a reason why, and I really want to just hang my hat on this. There's a reason why cedar is the chosen wood. Cedar and redwood, very common, both of those. There's a reason why they're chosen for projects outside, because they have natural tannins that run inside of them, and they are it protects them against the weather. And it also, they're aromatic. It protects them against being eaten by bugs.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why it's used, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And when you go away from that to something else, you're cutting a corner. And so anyway, I'm off my soapbox. I'm just saying.
Here's something interesting.
There's a reason why.
You mentioned about SPF that I see. I see people using it as handrail pickets, and I don't think it should be, because SPF, in products like that, anything that's finger jointed, is a piece of finger joint. Wood is not as strong as a solid piece of wood. I mean, they might argue that and say, well, it's just as strong, the glue's just as strong, but in that application, if you were to give it a swift kick, I guarantee you it'll break at those fingertips.
Yeah, right.
So,
and it's right out there in the open. It's not protected by your eave, which most of your siding and trim is, and you're in trouble. That's all the time we got. Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. We hope you have a great week. This has been another episode of Your Weekend Warriors right here.
The Weekend Warriors Radio Network.
Take care.